This is a 911 GT3. If you speak Porsche, it's a 991.1. And in terms of GT3 history, this is a very significant car. There's two reasons for that. Number one, this is the first GT3 to be offered with an automatic gearbox option. In this car, it's the 7-speed PDK dual clutch box, which was designed and developed exclusively for use on this car. Not only that, but that was the only option for gearbox in this car. Previously, the only choice you had was a 6-speed manual, the idea being that the GT3 was going to be sold to purists. However, with the fact that Ferrari themselves had abandoned the manual long before, and the idea that the GT3 was supposed to appeal to track heads, this was of course going to be a lot faster. Secondly, this was the first car to do away with the famed and well-loved Mezger engine. Previous GT3s had used an engine that was basically derived from the 911 GT1 unit and had almost nothing to do with the road-going 996 and 997 engine. This car used a version of the DFI engine, which had been introduced in the second generation 997 and was then continued to be used in the first generation of the 991. However, it is significantly reworked, and in this car displaces 3.8 litres, makes 475 horsepower, and has a red line of 9,000 RPM. Porsche purists, as they do of course, decried these changes, and Porsche seem to have learned from at least one of them, because the new 991 GT3 is going to be offered with the option of a manual or a PDK gearbox, and you can even specify a touring package which deletes some of the more obvious aero. Personally though, I think if you're going to have a GT3, you might as well go the whole hog. Of course, when this car came out, people realised that as much as on paper it had changed, it still did exactly what they wanted, and a flurry of 5-star reviews followed. Unfortunately, there were also a few incidents of cars catching fire due to an error in the casting of some of the components in the engine. That was all sorted years ago though, and the car's reputation was such that even now, years later, people are still paying over the original list price to get their hands on one of these. So can it really be that good? Well, let's not dilly-dally, let's find out. First impressions of the car. It feels very taut. You can feel that the entire thing has been dialed up from the regular 911. Just driving along at 20 miles an hour, you can feel the stiffness in the chassis, the stiffness in the suspension. It's not uncomfortable. This car doesn't have the optional bucket seats. I'm a big fan of those seats, and to be honest, I think they're probably just as well padded as these. These do not seem to have much padding in them at all. Now, cars like this often get described as having a general lack of torque. You know, naturally aspirated engine, not that big if you're used to, say, American capacities, and a 9,000 RPM redline. I could see why you'd look at it on paper and say that. The reality is that for regular driving, this car has more than adequate torque. And the gearbox in this car is very smooth. I'm just driving it through a little town at the minute, not doing anything silly with it, and it's nice, it's responsive, it does what it wants. In the 997 review that I did, I got a lot of criticism from some of you guys for saying I was using the PDK box wrong. I wasn't, it's just an older box. The PDK has several generations, and the first wasn't, surprise, surprise, the best. This is very nice, very smooth, very refined. One thing that's really changed about this type of car in the last sort of 15 years is the fact that they genuinely are day-to-day usable. 20 years ago, a car with this kind of performance, you wouldn't have wanted to use it day to day. It wouldn't have been possible. It would have been very unpleasant. The steering in this is quite light at normal speeds. It's easy to use. But you guys have absolutely no interest in what it's like doing 30 miles an hour through a town. All I want to tell you is that it can do that, and let's find out if it can do the other thing. Hell of an engine. have a problem when reviewing cars for you guys, and I have to be careful what I show you that I'm doing and how I'm driving. I mean, for example, I'd suspect that third gear in this car is probably capable of nearly 100 miles an hour, if not slightly more. I suspect. And so that means that I can't really show you many of the gears. Now here's the thing, I'm doing, let's say, the national speed limit in fourth. I'm doing less than half of the RPM this engine is capable of. I'm doing 3,800 and the red line is at 9. That's scary. So I feel like I want to change up at 6. And I look down there and go, you big girl, you utter girl. Yeah, sure, when 6th gear, 3,000 RPM, you put your foot down, not a huge amount happens. Well, of course it wouldn't. A third of the way around the rev counter. Certain car brands in the past get either dominated by the engine or the chassis. A Ferrari in particular have often been criticised for being a brilliant engine with a free car. This really is both. And the memory of that 991 is quite fresh in my mind, the GTS. This is very, very different. One thing in particular is actually really impressing me about this car, and that's how pointed the steering is. The last time I drove a GT3, the 996 generation, the steering was all over the place. I did that. It just felt like you were going to go off the road. It bump steered like nothing I've ever driven. This, no, it's sorted. Gearbox is perfect, and I'm a really, really big fan of a manual box, but with this engine I can sort of understand why they felt the need to do a PDK, and they did it right. There's a lot of hardware changes with this PDK box, I'm told. Exactly what they were, I don't know. The important thing is the result. I can also tell you that this engine does sound really, really good. The clips I've heard of it on YouTube, not that impressive, but it's mad. And I can't find anywhere to stretch its legs. So this car belongs to my friend James, who was previously looking at buying the GTS that I reviewed, and various things happened and he decided in the end to get this car. He made the right choice. This was more money than the GTS, but it is a lot more car. I know it's previously been said, and I've also implied myself, that the GTS is supposed to be a halfway house between a regular 911 and a GT3. Well, it's not 50% of the way to a GT3. A GTS is, let's say, about 25% of the way. It's definitely the best of the regular 911s, but is no GT3. Not even a little bit. This thing feels very, very special. The engine has a relative lack of torque, and that's actually a very good thing. Loads and loads of power, not masses of torque, which means that you aren't running anywhere near as much danger of just overwhelming the rear tyres through sheer force, certainly not at low RPMs. In poor conditions, this car would not, and I've been told, is not scary. It's a nice, easy car to drive. What this car has that a GT3 of old doesn't have is more of a dual character, I would say. You can go absolutely balls to the wall, hell for leather with this thing, around a track, around a country road, and then when you've done that, you want to pop on the motorway, you want to take a call, you know, have a bit of a Bluetooth conversation with someone, or just talk to the person next to you. It'll happily do that. It's still nice, it's still refined. The older cars never quite lost that sense of like, right, let's go, let's go, let's go. They never quite had that dual personality capability that this one does. And look, as much as I really loved the Mezger engine, as much as everyone else, this is good. This is really, really good. Here is second gear, or as much of it as I can show you. really pushes you when you change up. When you're right on the red line, right there. If you do it earlier, you do it like 7,000, it won't do it. When you're right on the edge, it gives you a kick, pushes you forwards. This car is a lot of fun. I don't even mind the paintwork. Don't tell him, but I actually quite like it in white. I'd probably do something mental, like paint the wheels red or something. Like the old GT3 RS.
That's RS territory though, isn't it?
Yes, had you asked me previously whether I would have had one of these with a manual or a PDK box, I would have said manual, no question. Having now driven it, I think actually the PDK is right. Everything about this car is pretty well set up, and the thing is with the PDK box as well, you can just change from one thing to another. You can be bimbling along and just having a nice old time, and then you can go maximum attack very, very easily. So overall, I really, really like this car. Hopefully at some point I'll be able to drive it again.